binomials containing radicals practice solutions. So if we look at example 1, we have 2 plus the square root of 3 times 2 minus the square root of 3. This is a difference of squares here, so we can use that a squared minus b squared. Your a would be 2, your b would be the square root of 3. So this is going to give us 2 squared minus the square root of 3 squared. The 2 squared is 4, the square root of 3 squared is 3, so 4 minus 3 is 1. For 2, we have 4 plus the square root of 11 times 4 minus the square root of 11. So our a is 4, our b is the square root of 11, difference of squares again, so we can use a squared minus b squared. So it's going to be 4 squared minus the square root of 11 squared. 4 squared is 16. The square root of 11 squared is 11. So 16 minus 11 is 5. For 3, we have the square root of 15 plus 6 times the square root of 15 minus 6. So again, difference of squares. Your a is the square root of 15. Your b is the 6. So this a squared minus b squared is going to be the square root of 15 squared minus 6 squared. So this is going to give us 15 minus 36, which is negative 21. For 4, we have the square root of 19 minus 9 times the square root of 19 plus 9. So our a is the square root of 19, our b is the 9. We're going to use a squared minus b squared. So we're going to have the square root of 19 squared minus 9 squared. Square root of 19 squared is 19. The 9 squared is 81. 19 minus 81 is negative 62. For 5, our a is the square root of 3, our b is the square root of 2. We're doing difference of squares again. So a squared minus b squared is going to give us the square root of 3 squared minus the square root of 2 squared. So this is 3 minus 2, which is 1. For 6, we have the square root of 15 minus the square root of 3 times the square root of 15 plus the square root of 3. So this is going to be the square root of 15 squared minus the square root of 3 squared. So this is 15 minus 3, which gives us 12. For 7, we have 2 plus the square root of 7 times 2 plus the square root of 7. So if you wanted to FOIL these, we could. This is just going to be 2 times 2, which is 4, plus 2 times the square root of 7 is 2 square root 7. Then the square root of 7 times 2 is 2 square root 7. And the square root of 7 times the square root of 7 is the square root of 49. So this is going to give us 4 plus 4 square root 7 plus 7. The 4 and the 7 we're going to combine because they're like terms to give us 11 plus 4 square root 7. For 8, we have 8 minus the square root of 6 squared. So this is 8 minus the square root of 6 times 8 minus the square root of 6. We can FOIL. So 8 times 8 is 64. 8 times the square root of negative square root of 6 is negative 8 square root 6. The negative square root of 6 times 8 is negative 8 square root 6. And the negative square root of 6 times negative square root of 6 is a positive square root 36. So this is going to give us 64 minus 16 square root 6 plus 6. The 64 plus 6 is 70 minus 16 square root 6. For 9, we're going to have 2 square root 2 minus 3 times 2 square root 2 minus 3. So again, we can FOIL. We're going to have 4 square root 4 minus 6 square root 2 minus 6 square root 2 plus 9. So this is 4 times 2 minus 12 square root 2 plus 9. So 4 times 2 is 8 minus 12 square root 2 plus 9. The 8 plus 9 is 17 minus 12 square root 2. There are other ways of doing this as well. So if we look at 10, we have 4 square root 10 plus 3 squared. In this, our A is the 4 square root 10, our B is the 3, so we can use, because of the addition, the A squared plus 2 times A times B plus B squared. So this is going to give us 4 square root 10 squared plus 2 times 4 square root 10 times 3 plus 3 squared. The 4 square root 10 squared is 16 times 10, or 16 square root of 100. The 2 times 4 is 8 square root 10 times 3 is 24 square root 10, and the 3 squared is 9. The 16 times 10 is 160 plus 24 square root 10 plus 9. We add the 160 and the 9 to get 169 plus 24 square root 10. So again, you don't have to do it this way, but it is a different way of doing it. Same type of problem. For this one, because there's the subtraction, you're going to use a squared minus 2 times a times b plus b squared. So our a is the square root of 13, our b is the 2 square root 5. So this is going to be the square root of 13 squared minus 2 times the square root of 13 times 2 square root 5 plus 2 square root 5 squared. So this now is going to give us 13 minus 4 square root 65 plus 4 square root 25, which is 4 times 5. So from here, we're going to have 13 minus 4 square root 65 plus 20. So this is giving us a final answer of 23 minus 4 square root 65. For 12, again, we have that subtraction. So we're going to use a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. Our a is the 3 square root 7. Our b is the square root of 3. So this is giving us 3 square root 7 squared minus 2 times 3 square root 7 times the square root of 3 plus the square root of 3 squared. So this is leaving us with 9 times 7 minus 6 square root 21 plus 3. The 9 times 7 is 63 plus 6 square root 21 plus 3. The 63 plus 3 is 66 plus 6 square root 21. Oh, I'm sorry, this is minus 6. Minus 6 square root 21. There we go. This should be a negative as well. Let me just do that again. Oops. There we go. Okay. For 13, next page. For 13, we have 2 square root 7 plus 3 square root 3 times 2 square root 7 minus 3. So again, difference of squares. We can do a squared minus b squared. This is our a, this is our b. So we are going to have 2 square root 7 squared minus square root 3 squared. So 2 square root 7 squared is 4 times 7, and the square root of 3 squared is just 3. The 4 times 7 is 28 minus 3 gives us 25. For 14, difference of squares once more. So our a is the 3 square root 5, our b is the square root of 2. We're going to use a squared minus b squared. So 3 square root 5 squared minus the square root of 2 squared. From here, we are going to have 9 times 5 minus 2. 9 times 5 is 45, minus 2 is 43. For 15, we have 6 square root 5 minus square root 7 times 6 square root 5 plus square root 7. So our a is the 6 square root 5. Our b is just the square root of 7. So we're going to use a squared minus b squared. So 6 square root 5 squared minus the square root of 7 squared. So 36 times 5 minus 7. The 36 times 5 is 180. Minus 7 is going to give us 173. For 16, we have 8 square root of 11 plus 2 square root 6 times 8 square root of 11 minus 2 square root 6. So again, difference of squares. Our A is the 8 square root of 11. Our B is the 2 square root 6. So we are going to have 8 square root 11 squared minus 2 square root 6 squared. So 64 times 11 minus 4 times 6. Our 64 times 11 is 704, and that 4 times 6 is 24. So 704 minus 24 gives us 680. For 17, we have 4 square root 3 minus 5 times 2 square root 3 plus 3. So this is not a difference of squares, so we have to actually FOIL. So 4 square root 3 times 2 square root 3 is going to give us 8 times 3. The 4 square root 3 times 3 is going to be 12 square root 3. Our negative 5 times 2 square root 3 is negative 10 square root 3. And negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. So if we combine like terms and simplify, this is going to be 24 plus 2 square root 3 minus 15. The 24 minus the 15 gives us 9 plus 2 square root 3. For 18, we have 6 square root 2 plus 4 times 3 square root 2 minus 5. So 6 square root 2 times 3 square root 2 is 18 square root 4, which is also 18 times 2. The 6 square root 2 times negative 5 is negative 30 square root 2. The 4 times 3 square root 2 is 12 square root 2. And the 4 times negative 5 is negative 20. So 18 times 2 is 36 minus the 30 plus 12. Negative 30 plus 12 is negative 18. Keep the square root of 2 minus 20. So 36 minus 20 gives us 16. 16 minus 18 square root 2. For 19, we're FOILing again. So 2 square root 5 times 3 square root 5 is going to give us 10 times 5, or 10 times the square root of 25. 2 square root 5 times the square root of 7 is 2 square root 35. The negative 6 square root 7 times 3 square root 5 is negative 18 square root 35. And the negative 6 square root 7 times square root 7 is going to be negative 6 times 7, or negative 6 square root 49. 10 times 5 is 50. The 2 minus 18 is negative 16. Keep the square root of 35. And then this negative 6 times 7 is 42. So 50 minus 42 is 8 minus 16 square root 35. For 20, we have 7 square root 13 plus 2 square root 6 times 2 square root 13 times 3 square root 6. So we're going to FOIL. 7 times 2 is 14 times 13. 7 square root 13 times 3 square root 6 is going to be 21. Square root 13 times 6 is, 13 times 6. The 6 times 3 is 8. Carry the 1, so 78. And then we have the 2 square root 6 times 2 square root 13 is going to be 4 square root 78. And 2 square root 6 times 3 square root 6 is 6 square root 36, which is 6 times 6. 6 times 6, not 6 times 3. Alright, so 14 times 13 is 182 plus 25 square root 78 plus 36. The 182 plus 36, the 2 and the 6 is 8, 3 and 8 is 11, carry the 1, so that's 218 plus 25 square root 78. For 21, we have 4 square root of 11 times 6 square root of 11. So that's going to be 24 times 11. 4 square root of 11 times 8 square root 2 is 32 square root 22. Negative 2 square root 2 times 6 square root of 11 is negative 12 square root 22. Negative 2 square root 2 times 8 square root 2 is negative 16 times 2. So for the 24 times 11, it's going to give us 264. The 32 minus 12 is 20. Keep the square root of 22. And the 16 times 2 is 32. So 264 minus 32 gives us 232 plus 20 square root 22. For 22, 8 square root 6 times 2 square root 6 is 16 square root 36. 16 times 6. 8 square root 6 times negative 3 square root 3 is going to be negative 24 square root 18. The negative 2 square root 3 times 2 square root 6 is negative 4 square root 18. And the negative 2 times the negative 3 is a positive 6. And then the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3. So, simplify. The 16 times 6 is going to give us 96. The negative 24 minus 4 is negative 28 square root 18. And the 6 times 3 is 18. So 96 plus 18 is going to give us 114 minus 28 square root 18. That we have to simplify. The 18 is 3 and 6. The 6 is 3 and 2. So this 28 times 3 is going to give us 144 minus 84 square root 2. For 23, we are rationalizing this denominator here. So we are going to multiply top and bottom of this fraction by the conjugate of 1 plus the square root of 5. So 1 minus the square root of 5 is going to be multiplied by top and bottom of this fraction. So we're going to be left with 1 minus the square root of 5 all over 1 minus the square root of 5 squared. So 1 squared minus the square root of 5 squared. So this is going to be 1 minus the square root of 5 all over 1 minus 5. So 1 minus the square root of 5 all over negative 4. You can't have a negative in the denominator, so turn it into a positive. This will become positive, this will become positive, and that negative 1 will become a negative. So it's going to be negative 1 plus the square root of 5 all over 4. For 24, again, your conjugate of that bottom is 2 minus the square root of 3. So we're going to multiply the top and the bottom of this fraction by 2 minus square root of 3. So this is going to be 2 minus the square root of 3 all over 2 squared minus the square root of 3 squared. So top stays 2 minus the square root of 3. Bottom becomes 4 minus 3, which is 1. So 2 minus the square root of 3 all over 1 is just 2 minus the square root of 3. For 25, we have 3 over the square root of 5 minus 2. So your conjugate of your denominator is the square root of 3 plus 2. Top and bottom will multiply. We're going to have to distribute that 3 in since it's something other than 1. So this is going to be 3 square root 3 plus 6 all over the square root of 5 squared minus 2 squared. So top is going to be 3 square root 3 plus 6 all over 5 minus 4, which is 1. So 3 square root 3 plus 6 all over 1 is just 3 square root 3 plus 6. For 26, we have 1 over the square root of 7 minus 3. So this is going to multiply top and bottom of this by the conjugate of the square root of 7 minus 3. So 7 square root of 7 plus 3. We're multiplying top and bottom of this fraction. That 1 on the top just leaves it as the square root of 7 plus 3. On the bottom, we're going to do the square root of 7 squared minus 3 squared. So square root 7 plus 3 all over 7 minus 9. So then this becomes the square root of 7 plus 3 all over negative 2. You can't leave the negative in the denominator, so change your signs on everything. So it's the negative square root 7 minus 3 all over 2. For 27, we have 1 plus the square root of 7 over 2 minus the square root of 7. So conjugate of your denominator is 2 plus the square root of 7, multiplying top and bottom by this. So we're going to actually FOIL on the top here. So 1 times 2 is 2. The 1 times 7, so the square root of 7 is the square root of 7. 7 times the square root, the square root of 7 times 2 is 2 square root 7. And square root of 7 times square root of 7 is just 7. All over 2 squared minus the square root of 7 squared. So this is going to give us 2 plus 3 square root 7 plus 7 all over 4 minus 7. So 9 plus 3 square root 7 all over negative 3. Again, change your signs here, but divide everything by 3. So this is going to be a negative 3 minus 1 square root 7 all over 1. So it's just negative 3 minus the square root of 7. For 28, oh my goodness, 28, we have 4 plus the square root of 5 times 3 minus the square root of 5. So conjugate of your denominator is going to be 3 plus the square root of 5. Multiply the top and the bottom by that. The 4 times 3 is 12, plus 4 square root 5 plus 3 square root 5 plus 5 all over 3 squared minus the square root of 5 squared. So this is going to be 12 plus 5 is 17 plus 7 square root 5 all over 9 minus 5. So 17 plus 7 square root 5 all over 4. For our next one, we have the square root of 3 minus 4 over the square root of 7 plus 2. So square root of 7 minus 2, we will multiply top and bottom. So we're going to have the square root of 21 minus 2 square root 3 minus 4 square root 7 plus 8 all over the square root of 7 squared minus 2 squared. So the square root of 21 can't change. The 2 square root 3 can't change. 4 square root 7 can't change. So that numerator there is going to stay exactly the way that it is. So the square root of 21 minus 2 square root 3 minus 4 square root 7 plus 8 all over the square root of 7 squared is 7. The 2 squared is 4. So then simplify this denominator further to give you the square root of 21 minus 2 square root 3 minus 4 square root 7 plus 8 all over 3. For 30, this should have had there we go, as a fraction. So we have the square root of 5 minus 2 over the square root of 3 plus 1. So we're going to multiply top and bottom by the square root of 3 minus 1. So this is going to give us the square root of 5 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 15. The square root of 5 times negative 1 is negative square root 5. Negative 2 times the square root of 3 is negative 2 square root 3, and negative 2 times negative 1 is a positive 2. On the bottom, we're going to have the square root of 3 squared minus 1 squared. So your top again is not going to change. Square root 15 minus square root 5 minus 2 square root 3 plus 2 all over 3 minus 1. So this whole numerator is going to be over 2. So we're going to have the square root of 15 minus the square root of 5 minus 2 square root 3 plus 2 all over 2. For 31, we have 7 over 2 square root 5 plus 1. So put parentheses on your denominator, take the conjugate of it, 2 square root 5 minus 1, multiply top and bottom of this fraction by 2 square root 5 minus 1. So distribute the 7 in. We're going to be left with 14 square root 5 minus 7 all over 2 square root 5 squared minus 1 squared. So we have 14 square root 5 minus 7 over 4 times 5 minus 1. The 4 times 5 is 20. So 14 square root 5 minus 7 all over 20 minus 1 is going to leave us with a final answer of 14 square root 5 minus 7 all over 19. For 32, the conjugate of our denominator is 3 square root 7 plus 5. So we're going to multiply the top and the bottom of our fraction by that 3 square root 7 plus 5. So from here, we are going to, like I said, distribute that 5. We have 15 square root 7 plus 25 all over 3 square root 7 squared minus 5 squared. So 15 square root 7 plus 25 all over 3 times 3 is 9 times 7 minus 25. So 15 square root 7 plus 25 all over 63 minus 25. So this is leaving us with a final answer of 15 square root 7 plus 25 all over 38. For 33, our conjugate of our denominator is 2 square root 5 plus 3. So we are going to put parentheses around the numerator and the denominator and multiply the top and the bottom of this fraction by the 2 square root 5 plus 3. So foiling, 4 times 2 square root 5 is 8 square root 5. 4 times 3 is 12. 2 square root 2 times 2 square root 5 is 4 square root 10. 2 square root 2 times 3 is 6 square root 2. For our bottom, since they're difference of squares, we can do 2 square root 5 squared minus 3 squared. So this is going to leave us with 8 square root 5 plus 12 plus 4 square root 10 plus 6 square root 2 all over 2 times 2 is 4 times 5 minus 9. The 4 times 5 is 20, so 8 square root 5 plus 12 plus 4 square root 10 plus 6 square root 2 all over 20 minus 9. Our final answer for this one is 8 square root 5 plus 12 plus 4 square root 10 minus 6 square root 2 all over 11. For 34, conjugate of our denominator is 3 square root 2 minus 3. So we're going to multiply the top and bottom by 3 square root 2 minus 3. Foil these out. 6 times 3 square root 2 is 18 square root 2. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. The negative 2 square root 3 times 3 square root 2 is negative 6 square root 6. The negative 2 square root 3 times negative 3 is negative 6 square root 3. On the bottom, since it's a difference of squares, we can do 3 square root 2 squared minus 3 squared. So 18 square root 2 minus 18 minus 6 square root 6 minus 6 square root 3 all over 9 times 2 minus 9. So once again, we have 8 square root 2 minus 18 minus 6 square root 6 minus 6 square root 3 all over 18 minus 9. So we have 8 square root 2 minus 18 minus 6 square root 6 minus 6 square root 3 all over 9. This should be an 18, not an 8. That's why this is looking weird to me. All right, so from here, we are going to say to ourselves, for those top numbers, the 18, the 6, and the 9, is anything divisible by those numbers that also goes into the 9? Yes, 3. So we're going to divide all of these by 3. So this is going to become a 3, this will become a 6, this will become a 6, this becomes a 2, this becomes a 2. So this simplifies to be 6 square root 2 minus 6 minus 2 square root 6 minus 2 square root 3 all over 3. And this is our final answer for this one.